Some places in Alaska do not offer rest. They offer silence, isolation, and rooms where people check in and never fully leave. These are true psychological horror stories from Alaskan Motels, real accounts of nights that went wrong in the coldest, quietest places in America. If you want real stories like this, calm, unsettling, and true, Midnight Whispers Stories is where they belong. Story 1. Motel where the office stayed dark. I have driven thousands of miles across America, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that some places are alive in ways that have nothing to do with the people living there. This is the story of the night I learned what that really means. It is a terrifying account of isolation, unsettling events, and a horrifying discovery that I am still not sure was real. Listen to these words carefully, because what I am about to tell you happened to me, and it could happen to anyone driving through the frozen darkness of Alaska at midnight. The highway stretched before my headlights like a black ribbon, pulling me deeper into a chilling emptiness. I had been driving for 14 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the kind of exhaustion that makes your hands numb on the steering wheel. My eyes felt grainy. My back ached. The landscape around me was nothing but darkness and silence, the kind of eerie quiet that makes you question if you are even still alive. Mile after mile, there was nothing. No houses, no lights, no other cars, just the wind howling against my truck and the sound of my own breathing, which seemed far too loud. I needed to sleep, not in an hour, not in 30 minutes. Now, that is when I saw the motel sign flickering through the frozen rain. The Crossroads Motel. Even from a quarter mile away, I could see that the neon letters glowed with a sickly pink light that made my stomach feel unsettled. The parking lot held 3 other vehicles, all of them covered in snow that had not been disturbed for days, maybe longer. The motel itself was a long, single-story structure with doors spaced evenly along its front. The design looked like something from the 1970s, the kind of place where terrible things happened in old crime stories. But I was too tired to care. I was too tired to think clearly about the creepy feeling that started at the base of my skull the moment I pulled into the lot. The front office glowed with light. Every window was illuminated. I could see the pale glow from inside, casting disturbing shadows on the frozen ground. The lights were definitely on. Someone was there. Someone had to be there. I parked my truck and stepped out into the screaming wind, and immediately I regretted it. The cold hit my face like a hand trying to push me back toward the vehicle. The temperature had to be well below freezing, maybe closer to 30 below. My breath came out in clouds. My eyes watered. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked toward the office door, each step crunching on the snow with a sound that echoed across the parking lot. The door was locked. I pulled on it again. Locked. I tried the handle several times, harder and harder, my desperation growing with each failed attempt. The lights were on. Someone was definitely there. I could feel it. I cupped my hands around my eyes and pressed my face against the glass door to look inside. The office was empty. Completely empty. No one behind the desk. No one moving around. No television playing. Just an empty office with all the lights blazing, waiting for someone to come and switch them off. The horrifying realization began to creep into my mind that maybe the lights were not waiting for anyone. Maybe they had been on for a very long time. I turned away from the door, my heart starting to beat faster than it should. The wind picked up, and I heard something that made my blood go cold. It was a sound like breathing, or wind moving through a narrow space, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the motel. I stood there in the parking lot, shaking from cold and from fear, trying to decide what to do. I could not leave. I had no other options. The next town had to be at least 80 miles away in this darkness, and I was a dangerous driver when I was this tired. I could stay in my truck, but the engine was making a noise that suggested it might not survive another 100 miles of driving. And something about this place was already telling me that I did not want to stay awake in this parking lot any longer than I had to. I walked around the motel, looking for another entrance, an unlocked window, anything that might give me access to a room. The motel seemed to know that I was looking. With each step, the unsettling feeling grew more intense. The air felt wrong. It was too cold. Yes, but it was more than that. It felt like the air itself was watching me. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. And I'm telling you anyway because it is the truth. Near the back of the motel, I found a window that was not quite fully closed. It was cracked open maybe an inch, just enough for me to get my fingers in and pull it wider. The window led into what looked like a laundry room. I did not think twice. I squeezed myself through the opening, landing hard on the tile floor inside, my jacket making noise as it scraped against the window frame. I held my breath and listened. Nothing moved. Nothing answered my arrival. The laundry room was darker than the outside. The window had only let in a sliver of the parking lot light. Now that I was inside, I had to fumble for my phone and use its flashlight to see. Washing machines lined the walls like silent, waiting witnesses. They all looked clean, unused. The air inside smelled like bleach and something else, something organic and wrong that I could not identify. It smelled like a place that had been closed off from the outside world for a very long time. I made my way out of the laundry room and into a hallway. The hallway was lit by a single overhead light that flickered in a way that made my eye twitch. Doors lined both sides, all of them closed, all of them looking identical. I tried one of the handles. Locked. I tried another. Locked. My heart was pounding now, and my breathing had become shallow and quick. I was a criminal in this place. I was trespassing. But I was also something else. I was trapped. At the end of the hallway was a room with an open door. The darkness inside was absolute, a kind of darkness that seemed to have weight and substance. I did not want to go in there. Everything in my body was telling me to turn around, climb back out through that laundry room window, and sleep in my truck, engine running or not. But I could feel something in that darkness. Some kind of presence, some kind of attention focused in my direction. The darkness seemed to be waiting for me. I stepped inside. My phone light swept across the room, and what I saw made me forget how to breathe. The room was not empty. It was furnished with a bed, a chair, a television mounted on the wall. But every surface was covered with papers. Hundreds of them, thousands of them. They covered the bed, the floor, every inch of wall space. They were all covered in handwriting, cramped and tiny, lines upon lines of words that seemed to have been written by someone whose mind was unraveling with each letter. I moved closer and tried to read some of it, my flashlight beam moving across the walls. The handwriting said the same thing over and over, repeated thousands of times. They're still here. They're still here. They're still here. They are always here. They never leave. They are watching me. They are in the walls. They are in the ceiling. They are in the darkness. I cannot leave. I cannot leave. The doors are not real. The windows are not real. There are no windows. There are no doors. There is only this room. There is only the watching. There is only them. They are hungry. They are so very hungry. They have been hungry for such a long time. I stumbled backward, my phone falling from my hand and hitting the floor. The light went out, and I was in complete darkness. In that darkness, I heard something that turned my fear into pure, primal terror. I heard breathing. I heard breathing that was not my own, coming from somewhere very close to me in that room. I heard it coming from above me. I heard it coming from below me. I heard it coming from inside the walls themselves. I ran. I do not remember exactly how I got out of that hallway. I remember running toward the flickering light, my hands outstretched, my breath coming in screams that I could not quite let out because my throat had closed up with pure horror. I found the laundry room and threw myself at the window. I squeezed through it, feeling my jacket rip, feeling my skin scrape against the frame. I fell into the parking lot and did not stop running until I reached my truck. My hands shook so badly that I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally started, I did not take the time to warm up the truck or check my mirrors. I just drove. I drove as fast as my shaking hands could manage, speeding back toward the highway, my headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. But I had only driven for maybe 500 yards when my headlights caught something in the road that made me slam on the brakes. There was a car parked on the shoulder of the highway, about a quarter mile from the motel. It was an older model sedan, the kind that looked like it had been sitting there for months. The driver's side door was open. Inside the car, I could see a figure sitting in the driver's seat. The figure was not moving. The figure was just sitting there, facing forward, its hands on the steering wheel. I sat in my truck, idling, trying to decide if I should go look. I should not have looked. Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to look. But I also knew that if I did not look, I would spend the rest of my life wondering who it was and why they were sitting in that car like that. So I got out of my truck and walked toward the sedan. My steps slow and careful, every fiber of my being braced for something to happen. The smell hit me first, a smell like death and rot and something else, something chemical. I knew that smell. I had been in a car accident when I was a kid, and the driver of the other vehicle had been dead for at least a week before they found him. This smell was the same smell. I did not look inside the car. I did not need to. I already knew what I would see. I already knew that person had been sitting there for a very long time. I already knew that they had been a guest at the Crossroads Motel. I already knew that they had gone to sleep in one of those rooms and had never woken up. Not in any way that mattered. I walked back to my truck and locked all the doors. I pulled out onto the highway and drove as fast as I dared in the darkness and the freezing rain. I drove for 2 hours without stopping, my hands gripping the wheels so hard that my fingers went numb. When I finally saw the lights of a town on the horizon, I felt like I had been given a second chance at being alive. I did not call the police. I know that makes me complicit in something that frightens me almost as much as that night frightened me. But when I made it to the next town and found an internet connection, I looked up the Crossroads Motel. There were no recent reviews. There were no current phone numbers. There was a business listing from 1986 showing that it was in operation, but nothing after that. The address I had was no longer on any map I could find. I drove back the next day in daylight. I took the same highway, watching the odometer, trying to find the exact spot where the motel should have been. I drove past it 3 times before I realized the motel was not there. There was an empty lot. A completely empty lot with no buildings, no signs, nothing but snow and the skeletal remains of some trees that looked like they had been dead for decades. But in the middle of that empty lot, I found something that made my hands shake again. It was a grave marker. Concrete, weathered, tilted at an angle. The name on it was covered in ice and snow, but I could read it with effort. It was the name of a man, and next to his name was a date. The date was the exact same date that I had stayed at the Crossroads Motel. The date was from my night there. The grave marker showed that this person had died more than 50 years ago. I do not know what I saw that night. I do not know if the motel was real or if I was so exhausted that my mind had created an elaborate nightmare. I do not know if the person in the car was real or a hallucination. I do not know if any of it was real, but I know this. Something is waiting in that darkness on the edges of the American highway system. Something has been waiting there for a very long time. It wears the shape of a motel. It offers rest to the tired. It promises shelter to the lost. But it does not give sleep. It does not provide comfort. It takes something from you when you stay in its rooms. It takes something essential, something that you do not realize is missing until you are so far away that you cannot go back. I have not driven through Alaska since that night. I have not stopped at a motel that I did not research extensively beforehand. I have not forgotten the feeling of that presence in the darkness, the feeling of being watched, the feeling of something hungry and patient waiting in the cold. And sometimes, late at night, when I am driving through a dark stretch of highway alone, I see a motel sign flickering in the distance. My heart stops, my hands tighten on the wheel, and I drive faster because I know what happens to people who stop. I know that somewhere out there, the office lights are still on. I know that the rooms are still waiting. I know that something is still inside, writing on the walls, repeating the same horrifying words over and over and over, waiting for the next tired driver to pull into the parking lot and make the mistake of seeking shelter. Some places, you see, are not really places at all. They are mouths. They are waiting. They are hungry. And once you have seen one, you can never be quite sure that you are sleeping at a real motel or a false one. You can never be quite sure that the person sitting next to you in the car is really there or just a memory of someone who stopped to rest. You can never be quite sure of anything again. This is what I learned at the Crossroads Motel. This is the chilling truth that haunts me every night. And now you know it too. The question that should terrify you is this. Have you ever stayed at a motel and wondered why the office lights were on but no one was there to let you in? Have you ever felt that unsettling sensation? Have you ever sensed that something was watching you from inside the walls? If you have, then you need to understand something important. You were never a guest. You were something else. And somewhere, in a room at the end of a dark hallway, someone is still writing about you on the walls. Someone is still writing your name. Someone is still writing the word that matters most in that horrifying place. They are still here. They are always here. Story 2. Warm room. Listen to me. I need to tell you what happened in Alaska because nobody else will believe me, and I am running out of time. The scariest thing about true horror is that it does not announce itself. It does not come with music or warnings. It arrives on a Tuesday in late October with the smell of pine trees and the sound of my truck door closing behind me. I had been driving for 18 hours straight. My name is Mark. I am 52 years old, and I had spent the last decade of my life avoiding anything that felt remotely frightening. I made a good living in insurance. I lived a quiet life. I did not take risks. But that October, I took one risk that changed everything, and now I am trapped in a nightmare that never ends. The road to Winterly, Alaska was the kind of road that makes you understand how small you really are. For the last 50 miles, I had not seen another vehicle. For the last 30 miles, I had not seen a house. The forest pressed in from both sides of the highway, thick and dark and suffocating, even in the late afternoon light. The trees were so tall that the sky seemed to shrink. The silence was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Winterly itself was barely a town. It was more of an idea someone had abandoned halfway through. The main street had maybe 4 buildings still standing. One of them was the Winterly Motor Lodge, and it was the only place offering rooms for the night. I had called ahead, and the woman on the phone had given me a room number without asking any questions. That should have been my first warning. The motel was a single-story structure that sprawled across the side of a hill like something dying slowly. The paint was the color of old concrete. The neon sign had burned out so long ago that the wood beneath was exposed and rotting. But it was warm inside the office, and the key the owner handed me was attached to a plastic diamond with the number 12 engraved on it. That was when I felt the first shiver of something wrong. The owner was an old man named Frank, or so his name tag claimed. He had the look of someone who had not slept in several years. His eyes were pale gray and completely empty. When I asked him why the motel still had guests this time of year, he looked at me for a long moment without blinking. Then he said, "People come here when they have nowhere else to go." That sentence haunted me then. It haunts me still. Room 12 was at the end of the east corridor, the direction the owner had pointed with a hand that shook slightly. As I walked down the hallway, the carpet beneath my feet muffled every sound. The walls seemed to lean inward. The lights were those horrible fluorescent tubes that made everything look like it was already dead, already part of some terrifying afterlife. No other doors showed lights underneath them. No other rooms gave any sign of being inhabited. I put my key in the lock of room 12. The door swung open. The first thing I felt was the heat. This is the part that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. The room was warm, not just comfortable warm, not the kind of warm you expect from a heating system in October. This was living warmth, human warmth, the kind of heat that only a person radiates when they have been in an enclosed space for hours. The kind of warmth that lingers after someone steps out of a room moments before you enter it. In remote parts of Alaska, especially in the cold season, rooms are rarely left unattended. Heating is too expensive. Rooms are kept cold until someone needs them. But this room was warm. This room felt like it had been occupied until the exact second I had turned my key in the lock. I stood in the doorway and felt the creeping sensation of wrongness spread across my body like cold water. The lamp on the nightstand was on, not just switched on in the normal sense. It was glowing with that dim warmth that suggests it had been burning for quite some time. On the desk, a cup of coffee sat in a ceramic mug. I touched it. It was still warm. My throat felt tight. My breathing became shallow. The bed was unmade, not messy, but lived in. The depression in the pillow was still visible. On the nightstand, a book lay open, face down, as if someone had just set it there. The page markers indicated it was less than halfway through. A bookmark made of white cloth was positioned exactly as if the reader had just stepped away. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, trying to process what was happening. The unsettling feeling grew stronger, more overwhelming. The room felt like it was watching me. The shadows in the corners felt dense and attentive. The creepy sensation crawled up the back of my neck and settled into my brain like something dark and alive. The bathroom door was closed. I did not want to open it. This is important. I did not want to look inside. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave the room, to drive away from this haunted place, to forget about Winterly and Frank in room 12 forever. But I could not move. I was paralyzed by the chilling fear that was building inside my chest, the kind of bone-deep terror that only comes when you know something is fundamentally and horrifically wrong. I opened the bathroom door. It was empty. The bathroom was normal and empty and gave no indication of anything disturbing. The shower curtain was pulled back. The bathroom mat was dry. The sink was clean. Nothing was out of place. But the creepy feeling did not diminish. If anything, it grew stronger. Because now I knew that whoever had been in this room, whoever had drunk that coffee and read that book and made that bed warm with their body, had not simply stepped into the bathroom. They had vanished. I backed out of the bathroom and looked at the room again. Really looked at it. The book on the nightstand, I realized, was a paperback thriller with a torn cover. The title was The Vanishing. My hands were shaking now. My breathing was becoming difficult. The terrifying realization was beginning to set in that I was in a nightmare situation I did not understand. That was when I heard the sound. It came from inside the walls. A scratching. A very faint, very distinct scratching sound. like something with claws moving through the spaces between the drywall and the foundation. It lasted for only 2 seconds, but it was the most disturbing sound I had ever heard. It was not the sound of mice. Mice do not make sounds like that. That sound was deliberate. That sound was searching. I moved toward the door. I needed to leave, but as I reached for the handle, I noticed something on the wall. A small mark near the light switch, hidden in the shadow cast by the furniture. I leaned closer. It was a scratch, fresh and deep, carved into the paint and drywall. And there were more of them. 5 scratches, grouped together, as if made by fingernails, trying desperately to reach something, to signal something, to communicate something that was unspeakable. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might collapse. I left the room. I did not take my bag. I did not turn off the light. I simply left, closing the door behind me with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in that empty hallway. I walked as quickly as I could back to the office. Frank was still behind the desk, staring at nothing, his pale eyes unblinking. I told him I was leaving. I told him the room was not acceptable. He did not seem surprised. He simply nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed something he had always known. As I was leaving, he said something that made my blood freeze solid in my veins. He said, "You were lucky. Most people do not get out of that room once the door closes behind them." I did not ask him what he meant. I did not want to know. I got in my truck and I drove. I drove for 6 hours in the darkness, heading south, my headlights cutting through the thick blackness of the night like the only thing real in a world of shadows and nightmares and buried secrets. But here's what haunts me. Here's what makes this story terrifying in a way that goes beyond the obvious. I kept the room key. I still have it. I do not know why. It sits on my desk, that plastic diamond with the number 12 engraved on it. And sometimes, when the lights are low and the house is quiet, I can smell it. The smell of that room. The smell of coffee that is still somehow warm. The smell of someone who was there and then was not. Last month, I received a letter. No return address. No postmark from any recognizable town. Inside was a single sentence written in a handwriting that looked familiar but that I could not place. It said, "Room 12 is waiting for you to come back." The nightmare does not end. The horror continues. It spreads like something alive, growing in the darkness, waiting patiently in a warm room in a forgotten town in Alaska, where people go when they have nowhere else to go. The chilling truth is that some doors, once you have stepped through them and escaped, never really close. They remain open in your mind, inviting you back, promising you something terrible and dark and final. And I think I'm going to go back. I think I have always been going to go back. I think that is what the warm room was waiting for all along. If these first stories already feel too real, that is because they are. Midnight Whispers Stories is not about monsters or cheap scares. It is about the kind of horror people experience alone, late at night, in places like Alaska. Subscribe now, because these stories do not end here, and the next one stay with you longer. Story 3. Empty Mile, a true horror confession. Have you ever noticed how silence can be more terrifying than any sound? How the absence of something familiar can be more frightening than anything your mind can imagine. I am going to tell you about the night I learned that lesson in the most horrifying way possible. This is a true account. This really happened to me, and I am still not sure I fully understand what occurred on that isolated Alaskan highway. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever I encountered out there, it changed me forever, and I need to tell someone before the fear completely consumes me. It was late October when I decided to drive from Fairbanks to Juneau for work. The drive would take me through some of the most desolate territory in North America. I was tired, exhausted, really, but I had been doing this route for 3 years without incident. I knew the highways. I knew the towns. I thought I knew what to expect. I was wrong, dead wrong. The sun had set around 5 in the evening. By 6, the darkness was complete and suffocating. The kind of darkness you only experience in remote Alaska, where the natural light abandons you entirely for months at a time. My headlights cut through that blackness like fragile yellow knives, but they barely illuminated more than 30 feet of asphalt ahead. The rest was pure, impenetrable shadow. No other cars had passed me in over 2 hours. No lights from distant cabins. No signs of civilization. Just me, my truck, and the creeping sensation that something was very, very wrong. Around 7:30, I saw the motel sign, the Northlander Lodge. It appeared suddenly through the darkness, a large neon structure that glowed an unnatural shade of blue and green against the black highway. The sign should have been welcoming. Instead, it felt like a warning. The motel itself sat back from the road about 100 yards, a cluster of low buildings arranged in an L shape around a parking lot. I had passed this motel before. I knew it existed, but tonight, something about it felt different. Something felt sick. I slowed my truck and stared at the parking lot through the darkness. It was completely empty. Not mostly empty, not nearly empty, completely, utterly, absolutely empty. No cars, no trucks, nothing. In Alaska, empty motels at night are deeply unusual, especially along long highways where travelers have few options and often choose to stay rather than risk another hour of driving in darkness. The Northlander Lodge had maybe 20 rooms, and it was the last place to stop for over 80 miles. Yet the parking lot was a vacant expanse of cracked asphalt. The motel office window glowed with a pale yellow light, but I could not see anyone moving inside. The individual room lights were off. All of them. Every single window was dark. Silence settled faster than expected. This literally, the moment I decided to keep driving instead of stop, a thick, heavy silence wrapped around my truck. My diesel engine suddenly seemed impossibly loud, almost offensive in its intrusion into the quiet. When I passed the motel and moved beyond its site, I felt like I had crossed some invisible boundary. The silence became heavier. It pressed against the windows and doors like something alive and hungry. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. That is not entirely uncommon in remote Alaska, but the static sounded different than usual. It had a rhythm to it, almost like it was breathing. I clicked it off and gripped the steering wheel tighter, telling myself I was being irrational, that my mind was playing tricks because of the exhaustion and the loneliness of the drive. That is when I saw the first sign. It was a handwritten sign nailed to a dead tree at the side of the road. The cardboard was weathered and torn, and the letters were crude and desperate. It read, "Do not stop. Do not turn around. Drive through the night." I could see other signs as I drove, each one more disturbing than the last. Some were too faded to read, but others were clear enough. Keep your doors locked. Do not make eye contact. Pretend you do not see it. My heart was racing now. My hands were shaking. Part of me wanted to believe these were jokes, some kind of prank by locals or internet pranks made physical. But something deeper in me, something primitive and ancient, understood that these were genuine warnings. These signs were put here by people who had experienced something horrifying, something terrifying, something they felt compelled to warn others about. The darkness outside my windows had become absolute. My headlights seemed weaker than before, as if the darkness was actually pushing back against them, consuming their light before it could travel far. I was alone on the highway now, completely alone, and I realized with a sickening clarity that I was not going to see another vehicle before sunrise. That was still over 10 hours away. Then I heard it. It was not a sound exactly. It was more like the suggestion of a sound, something just at the edge of my hearing. A clicking noise, rhythmic, methodical, like the sound of fingernails tapping on glass, but much faster and much, much closer. I whipped my head around, searching the darkness outside my windows. Nothing, just the black highway stretching endlessly behind me and endless forest on both sides. I could see nothing, but the clicking continued. My eyes darted to the back window. That is when I saw it. There was a shape, a dark, shadowy figure standing in the middle of the highway behind my truck. It was impossibly tall and impossibly thin. Its proportions were wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong in a way that made my brain hurt trying to process what I was seeing. The shape had no face that I could discern, but I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, of being observed with an intensity that was almost physical. I slammed on the accelerator. My truck lurched forward, engine roaring. I did not take my eyes off the rearview mirror. The shape did not move. It simply stood there in the middle of the highway, watching me drive away. But here's the thing that still terrifies me, that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning covered in cold sweat. It was not getting smaller. The highway extended for at least a mile behind me, a straight stretch of asphalt that should have made anything in the distance appear smaller as I moved away from it. But the figure stayed exactly the same size. It stayed exactly the same distance away no matter how fast I drove. I told myself I was hallucinating. Exhaustion, the fear, the isolation. My mind was breaking under the weight of the loneliness and the darkness. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. I could not think about the shape. I could not think about the fact that something impossible was happening. The clicking sound grew louder. It was inside the truck now. I was absolutely certain of it. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ceiling, the dashboard, the walls. Click, 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 click. A rhythmic, metronomic clicking that matched my heartbeat almost perfectly. I turned up the volume on the radio, but the static refused to drown it out. The clicking cut through everything. It was there, and it was getting faster. I sped up to 80 miles per hour. Then 90. The road was straight, and I could see far enough ahead that I believed I was safe. But the darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating. The forest seemed to be moving closer. The trees on both sides of the highway were getting denser, taller, more present. And the clicking sound was becoming frantic now, desperate, like whatever was making that sound was panicking. That is when my truck started to lose power. The headlights dimmed, the engine sputtered, the speedometer dropped from 90 to 70 to 50 without me touching the brake. Something was wrong with the engine. Something impossible was happening. The dashboard lights began to flicker. The radio cut in and out. For a fraction of a second, between the bursts of static, I heard a voice. It was not speaking words. It was making sounds that no human mouth could produce. Sounds like something being torn apart. Sounds like pain and rage and hunger all combined into a single, horrifying utterance. I slammed on the brakes and pulled hard on the steering wheel. The truck skidded off the highway, gravel spraying underneath the tires. I fought the steering wheel, trying to regain control, but the truck was moving faster than I was directing it. The forest was coming closer. Trees were suddenly in front of me, and I was going to hit them. I was certain of it. But the truck swerved at the last moment. I swear I did not do it. The steering wheel simply turned on its own, and suddenly I was pointing back toward the highway. The truck slowed to a stop. I sat there, gasping, my chest heaving, my vision blurry with tears. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the steering wheel. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, to get out of the truck and flee into the forest, but something stopped me. Some survival instinct understood that leaving the truck would be a fatal mistake. The clicking sound stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the sound had been. I could not hear anything now. Not the engine, not the wind, not the forest, just absolute, perfect silence. And in that silence, I heard my own breathing, loud and ragged and animal-like. And beneath that, I heard something else. A scratching sound from underneath the truck. Fingernails on metal. Slow, deliberate, methodical. Something was crawling along the underside of my truck, dragging its fingers across the metal frame. I could feel the vibration of it through the suspension. Back and forth, as if whatever was under there was trying to decide what part of the truck would be easiest to open. My eyes were locked on the odometer. 87,234 miles. I found myself staring at those numbers because I could not look anywhere else. I could not think about what was happening. If I thought about it, I would scream. If I screamed, maybe it would know exactly where I was. The scratching sound stopped, and then, very slowly, something began to pull itself up the side of the truck. I could feel the weight of it. I could hear the strain of metal and rubber as something large and impossibly heavy dragged itself across my door. The window was next to my face. The glass was only inches away from my skin. Whatever was out there was separating from me by nothing more than a thin sheet of glass and the fragile illusion that it was protection. I closed my eyes. That was my mistake. The moment I closed my eyes, I felt a presence in the truck with me. It was not physical. I cannot explain it better than that. But in the darkness behind my eyelids, I could sense something in the cab with me. Something that was very close and very hungry. Something that had been chasing me for a very long time and had finally caught up. The truck suddenly jerked forward. My eyes flew open. The engine was running again. The headlights blazed to life, brilliant and bright and almost blinding in their intensity. The truck was moving, accelerating rapidly, tires gripping the asphalt as I surged back onto the highway. The speedometer climbed. 70, 80, 100, 120. The truck was pushing itself to limits it should not have been able to reach. And I realized, with a clarity that cut through the terror, that I was not driving the truck anymore. The highway was a blur now. The forest was streaming past on both sides. My hands were still on the wheel, but they were not in control. My foot was not on the accelerator, but the truck was screaming down the highway at speeds that would have left me unconscious under normal circumstances. And in the rearview mirror, I could see the shape again. The tall, thin, impossibly wrong figure. It was standing in the middle of the highway behind me, and it was growing smaller this time. It was staying in one place while I moved away from it at insane speed. I tried to scream, but I had no voice left. I tried to move my hands, but my arms would not obey me. I tried to stand up, but my legs were locked in place. I was a passenger in my own body, a witness to my own abduction. My mind was still racing, still conscious, still aware of everything that was happening, but my body had been overridden by something else. Something that had decided it had use for me. The sun began to rise. The darkness at the edges of the sky faded to gray, then to pale yellow, then to orange and red. The dawn was breaking over the horizon, and the moment the first rays of sunlight touched the highway, the grip on my body released. I gasped for air, suddenly able to breathe, suddenly able to move again. The truck slowed gradually, as if it was making a conscious decision to allow me back into control. When the sun was fully above the horizon, the truck came to a stop at a scenic overlook. I was miles away from where I had been. The odometer showed the truck had traveled over 150 miles in what felt like minutes. My fuel gauge was nearly empty despite the fact that I had filled up just before sunset the previous day. I sat there for a long time, unable to move, unable to think, unable to process what had happened. When I finally had the strength to drive again, I continued toward Juneau at a normal speed. I did not speak to anyone about what happened. I did not report it to the police. I knew that no one would believe me. I knew that even saying the words out loud would make me sound insane. But I have driven that highway only once more since that night, and only in broad daylight with other vehicles following behind me. And every time I pass the Northlander Lodge, I check the parking lot. It is always empty, always, no matter the season, no matter the time of day. The office light is always on. The rooms are always dark. And sometimes, when I am driving that stretch of highway, I see signs nailed to trees. New signs, signs that have not been there long. And they always say the same thing: do not stop. The fear is still with me. The unsettling feeling that something followed me home that night. The disturbing knowledge that whatever was chasing me on that dark highway, whatever that terrifying shape was, it knew my truck. It knew exactly where I was. And most horrifying of all, it is still out there, still waiting, still watching. And I believe, with complete and absolute certainty, that someday I will have to drive that highway again. And when I do, it will be waiting for me. The clicking sound still echoes in my dreams. Story 4. Signal. Have you ever heard a sound that should not exist? A noise so wrong, so out of place, that your body knows to be afraid before your mind catches up. I heard that sound in Alaska, and I am still hearing it now. The drive up the Alaska highway was supposed to clear my head. 42 years old, divorced, laid off from the plant in Montana. I needed distance from everything familiar. I needed to disappear for a while. The road stretched empty for hours, nothing but dense forest and mountains that looked like teeth against the gray sky. No other cars, no signs of civilization, just me, the highway, and the creeping darkness of late October. The motel appeared suddenly, almost too suddenly. One moment there was nothing. The next there was this low building hunched beside the road like something waiting. The sign said Clearwater Lodge, but I saw no water anywhere, clear or otherwise. The parking lot held 2 other vehicles, both covered in dust and pine needles like they had been sitting there for weeks. I should have kept driving. That instinct was there, that small voice warning me. But night was coming fast in Alaska, and the next town was another 100 miles north. The clerk behind the desk was a woman in her 60s with eyes that looked past me rather than at me. She handed over a key attached to a heavy wooden tag. Room 7. She did not ask for a credit card. She did not ask my name. She just watched me walk away with an expression I could not read. Something between pity and resignation. The room smelled like old carpet and pine cleaner, a double bed with a faded quilt, a small television on a dresser, a bathroom with tiles that had probably been white once. I dropped my bag and sat on the bed, feeling the springs creak beneath me. Outside, the forest pressed close to the windows. Too close. I could see the branches scraping the glass when the wind picked up. I tried my phone. No signal. Not unusual this far north, but still unsettling. I was completely cut off. I turned on the television just for noise, for some connection to the normal world. Static on most channels. A grainy news broadcast on one station, talking about weather patterns and road conditions. I left it on and went to shower. The water was lukewarm and smelled faintly of sulfur. I stood under it anyway, trying to wash away the road, the stress, the feeling that something was watching me through the thin shower curtain. When I got out, the television had changed channels. Now it showed static, that black and white snow with a hissing sound that filled the room. I definitely left it on the news. I was certain of it. I grabbed the remote and turned it off, then unplugged the television completely from the wall. In Alaska, power outages are common, but this felt different. I tried to sleep, The bed was uncomfortable, the room too quiet now without the television. I could hear every sound from outside. Branches scraping, wind howling, and something else, a low humming noise, almost below the range of hearing. It made my teeth ache. It made my stomach turn. I told myself it was just the building settling, just the wind in the power lines, just my imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place. Then the television turned on. Not with sound, just the screen glowing blue in the darkness, casting strange shadows across the walls. I sat up fast, heart hammering. The television was still unplugged. The cord lay on the floor exactly where I left it, but the screen was bright, showing nothing but that awful static snow. No pictures, no sound, just light and shadow dancing in patterns that hurt to watch. I got out of bed and approached it slowly. The screen was cold when I touched it. No warmth of electronics running. No electrical hum. But it was on, definitely on. I grabbed the television and turned it around, checking for batteries, for some explanation. Nothing. Just an old television that could not possibly be working without power. The room felt smaller after that. I backed away toward the door, keeping my eyes on the glowing screen. That was when I noticed something in the static. Patterns. Shapes forming and dissolving too quickly to identify. I wanted to look away but could not. The shapes were almost familiar, almost recognizable, like faces seen through frosted glass, like hands reaching from deep water. A sharp knock on the wall made me jump. It came from room 6, the room next to mine. 3 hard knocks, deliberate and loud. Then silence. I waited, listening. No voices, no movement, just those 3 knocks. Then nothing. I went to the shared wall and knocked back. Hello? Anyone there? My voice sounded small and frightened. No response, just the humming noise, louder now, and the television screen casting its cold light. I grabbed my jacket and keys and left the room. The parking lot was empty. Both vehicles I saw earlier were gone. Just my truck sitting alone under a broken light that flickered and buzzed. The motel office was dark. No one at the desk. No one anywhere. I tried the door to room 6 and found it unlocked. It swung open on squeaking hinges. The room was identical to mine. Same bed, same dresser, same layout. But it was freezing inside, so cold I could see my breath. And the television was on here too, showing the same static, the same patterns moving through the snow. On the bed lay a suitcase, open and empty. On the nightstand sat a wallet. I picked it up with shaking hands and looked inside. Driver, S license for a man named Robert Chen, age 38, from Seattle. The license photo showed a normal guy, slightly balding, with a nervous smile. In the photo slot across from the license was a picture of 2 kids, a boy and girl, both elementary school age. Where was Robert Chen now? I backed out of the room and checked the parking lot again. Still empty, still just my truck. The forest around the motel seemed darker. The trees pressed closer. That humming noise was everywhere now, coming from the ground, from the air, from inside my own head. I ran back to my room and locked the door, pushing the dresser in front of it for good measure. The television was still on, still showing static, but now I could hear something under the hiss. Voices, faint and distorted, like a radio tune between stations. I could not make out words, just the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of conversation. Multiple voices overlapping, desperate voices, frightened voices. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me yelp. I pulled it out with trembling hands. Still no signal, but a text message had come through somehow. From a number I did not recognize. The message said, "Do not watch the screen." I looked at the television. The static had cleared slightly, and now I could see something in the depths of it. A room, my room, from an angle that should not exist, from somewhere up near the ceiling looking down. I could see myself standing there holding my phone, staring at the screen. And behind me, in the image on the television, stood figures. 3 of them, tall and wrong, with limbs that bent in places they should not bend. They were close enough to touch me. I spun around. The room was empty, but when I looked back at the screen, the figures had moved closer to my image. One of them was reaching out. Another text arrived. They come through the signal. Leave now. I did not hesitate. I grabbed my keys and bag and shoved the dresser away from the door. The television screen was getting brighter, the humming louder. I could feel heat coming from it now. Wrong heat, like fever heat. The static was clearing more, showing not just my room but other rooms, other people. I saw Robert Chen standing in what must have been this same room, staring at a television just like mine. I saw him reach toward the screen. I saw those figures surround him. I saw him step forward into the static and disappear. I ran out the door, across the parking lot, into my truck. The engine started on the first try, thank God, and I threw it in reverse. As I backed away, I saw every room in the motel light up, every television turning on simultaneously, and in every window, I saw figures standing, watching me leave, tall and motionless and wrong. The Alaska highway stretched black and empty ahead of me. I drove fast, too fast for the dark road. I did not care. I needed distance. I needed to get away from that humming noise, that signal, whatever it was calling people into the static. I drove until sunrise, until I reached the next town and found a diner with people and light and normal conversation. I never reported what I saw. Who would believe me? I searched for Robert Chan online. Found an article from 2 months ago. Seattle man missing after Alaska trip. Family asking for information. The article showed the same photo from his wallet. 2 kids waiting for their father to come home. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, stress, my mind playing tricks after months of pressure and change. But I know what I saw. I know those figures were real. And I know they are still there, in that motel, in those rooms, waiting behind the static for the next person to stop for the night. Waiting for someone else to watch the screen when it turns on by itself. The worst part is the dreams. Every night now, I hear that humming. Every night, I see that static creeping into my vision. And every night, I feel those figures getting closer. They came through the signal once. They tasted the world beyond their screen. And I think they remember me. The one who got away. The one who saw them and ran. Sometimes late at night, my television will turn on by itself. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see those familiar shapes moving in the static. Just long enough to hear that humming noise rising up through the floorboards. And I wonder how long until they find a way through. How long until the signal reaches far enough. How long until I am standing in my living room, reaching toward the screen, stepping forward into the static like Robert Chan did. Because the pull is there now, the curiosity, the horrible need to know what exists in that space between channels. That space where the figures wait. That space that should not exist but does. The signal is spreading, and it remembers everyone who hears it. Story 5. Motel at mile marker 47. Have you ever checked into a place and immediately known something was wrong, but decided to stay anyway? That terrifying choice is exactly what I made. And now, years later, I am finally ready to tell you what happened to me at the Denali Motor Inn in Alaska. My name is Michael, and I need you to understand something before I begin. I am a rational man. I work in insurance. I pay my taxes on time, and I do not believe in ghosts or demons or any of that nonsense. What happened to me happened because of something real, something that should have terrified me far more than it did, right up until the moment I understood exactly what I was living through. It was late September when I drove up the Parks Highway heading toward Fairbanks. I had left Anchorage that morning, and the sky was already shifting into darkness by 3 in the afternoon. That is what Alaska does to you in the fall. The sun gives up early. The world closes its eyes while you are still awake and watching, still driving, still completely alone on roads that seem to stretch forever. I had been on the road for 8 hours when I saw the sign. Denali Motor Inn, vacancy, exit at mile marker 47. The parking lot was empty. Not mostly empty, completely empty. Just me, my Honda Civic, and a motel that looked like it had been built sometime in the 1970s and had been slowly dying ever since. The building was a single long corridor, maybe 30 rooms, all facing the highway. The office was dark except for a faint light coming from somewhere inside. I should have driven past. I know that now. But it was nearly dark. The next town was 50 miles away, and my eyes were burning from the road. Sometimes fear is not enough to stop you from making the worst decisions of your life. The owner was a woman named Carol. She was thin and older, maybe 60, with hair that was dyed an unnatural shade of black. She smelled like cigarettes and something else I could not quite identify. When I asked for a room, she hesitated for just a moment too long before answering. I should have noticed that. Room 24 was near the end of the corridor. The key was actual metal, not a card, and it was ice cold in my palm. The hallway was narrow, and the carpet was a dark brown that might have originally been something else. The fluorescent lights above were one of them flickering in that eerie rhythm that makes you feel like the building itself is breathing. The room was exactly what I expected. 2 double beds, a bathroom with rust stains in the sink, a television that was probably not even a flat screen when new. The window overlooked the highway, and beyond that, Nothing but darkness and the distant shape of mountains I could barely see. I locked the door and sat on the edge of one of the beds. The mattress made a sound like a living thing shifting its weight. Outside, I could hear the occasional truck passing on the highway. The sound was a comfort somehow, proof that the world was still there, still moving, still alive beyond the walls of this motel. I was beginning to drift off to sleep when the nightmare started. Not in my dreams, but in reality, in the hallway just outside my door. The footsteps began around midnight. I remember this because I was staring at the digital clock on the nightstand, watching the minutes crawl past like they were moving through thick oil. The sound started as a soft shuffling, barely audible, but unmistakable. Someone was walking slowly along the hallway outside my room. Shuffle, pause, shuffle, pause. It was the rhythm of someone who was deliberate, careful, moving with intention. The hallway of the Alaskan Motel amplified every sound. That is one of those details that seems unimportant until it matters. The thin walls, the acoustic properties of old carpet and cheap plaster, they all worked together to make that hallway a kind of echo chamber. A person could walk past your door, and you would hear not just their footsteps but the sound of their clothing moving against their body, the slight catch in their breathing, the barely audible shift of their weight from one foot to the other. In Alaska, thin walls make nights feel longer, not louder. The footsteps stopped just outside my door and never continued. I lay completely still in the darkness, barely breathing, listening. For 5 full minutes, there was only silence. Then, I heard something far more terrifying than the footsteps had been. I heard the sound of someone leaning against my door. It was a subtle noise, the barest pressure of a shoulder or back against the wooden frame, but it was unmistakable. Someone was standing on the other side of my door, in the darkness, in the hallway, waiting. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs, waiting for the person to leave. But they did not leave. Instead, they waited for what felt like hours. Occasionally, I would hear that soft scraping sound as they shifted their weight, a sign that they were still there, still pressed against my door, still waiting for something. Just before dawn, I heard them finally walk away. The footsteps moved down the hallway, growing fainter until the sound disappeared entirely. When the sun began to filter through the window, I was almost delirious from exhaustion and adrenaline. I packed my bag in a panic, throwing my clothes into my suitcase without bothering to fold them. I was going to leave. I was going to get in my car and drive away from the Denali Motor Inn and never think about it again. But when I opened the door, I made a horrifying discovery. There were scratches on the inside of my door. Fresh scratches. Long, deliberate marks that went from about my waist height all the way up to where the door met the frame. Fingernail scratches. Someone had been clawing at my door from the outside, trying to create noise or trying to get my attention or trying to claw through the wood itself. I slammed the door shut and locked it again. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely function. I sat back on the bed and forced myself to breathe, to think, to be rational. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I had imagined the scratches. Maybe they were already there, remnants from a previous guest. Maybe the motel manager had scratched the door for some reason I could not fathom. Any explanation was better than the one my mind was trying to suggest. I went to the office and confronted Carol. I asked her if she had been in the hallway last night, if she had stood outside my door. She looked at me with an expression that was difficult to read. Pity, maybe, or confirmation of something she already knew. She told me to check out by noon, but before I left, she told me something else. She said that in the 9 years she had owned the motel, she had noticed a pattern. Every few weeks, someone like me would come in, someone passing through, someone just needing a place to stay for a single night. And sometimes, just sometimes, those people would report strange incidents. Footsteps, scratching sounds, the feeling of being watched through their window. I asked her why she did not close the motel if it was haunted. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said the motel was not haunted. Something here is just lonely, she told me. And occasionally, it gets tired of being alone. I left the Denali Motor Inn at 9 in the morning. I drove for 3 hours straight without stopping, unable to shake the feeling that something was following me. That presence, that something I had felt in that hallway outside my door, seemed to be sitting in my backseat, watching me, waiting. But here's the part that truly frightened me. Here's the detail that haunts me still. I did not stop to check the scratches on my door until after I had driven away from the motel. I only turned around on the highway about 50 miles later, found a rest area, and looked at my phone where I had snapped a picture of them that morning. The scratches were still there in the photo, as clear as anything I had ever seen. But when I got home to Anchorage and downloaded the image onto my computer, the scratches were gone. The door was completely unmarked, perfect, untouched, as if they had never existed at all. For weeks after that night, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined everything. That the stress of driving alone on unfamiliar roads, the psychological pressure of being isolated in that eerie motel, had created the scratches in my mind. I tried to forget about Carol and her cryptic warnings. I tried to move on with my life and pretend that nothing terrifying had happened. But then the phone calls started. They began with a simple ringing late at night. I would answer, and there would be only silence on the other end. Then, just before I hung up, I would hear something. A soft sound, a breathing pattern that was not quite human. A rhythmic scraping noise that was impossible to describe but instantly familiar. It was the sound from the hallway. I checked the number. It was coming from somewhere in Alaska, but the number changed every time. Sometimes it came from Fairbanks. Sometimes from a number that appeared to be from the park's highway area itself. Once, the number showed up as being from mile marker 47. I stopped answering the phone. I changed my number. I moved to a new apartment. But somehow, the calls continued. I would receive messages on my email from accounts that looked random, meaningless strings of letters and numbers. But in each message, there was a single phrase, repeated over and over. Come back, come back, come back. 3 months ago, I received a letter in the mail. A physical piece of paper, sent through the actual postal service. Inside was a key, an old metal key, exactly like the one Carol had given me that night. And written on a slip of paper beneath it were the words, Room 24 is waiting for you. We have been very lonely. I threw the key in the trash, but I kept the paper. I do not know why. Some part of me understands that I will return to the Denali Motor Inn someday. Some part of me knows that this is not over, that whatever is in that hallway, whatever was pressing against my door that night, whatever has been clawing and scratching and calling to me across the months, will eventually succeed in bringing me back. Because I have realized something far more chilling than any of the individual terrifying incidents. The scratches disappearing from my photo, the phone calls from impossible numbers, the key arriving at my house when I never told anyone my address. None of these things make sense if I was being haunted by a ghost or visited by a human intruder. They only make sense if whatever is at the Denali Motor Inn is something that exists partially outside of our normal reality. Something that can reach through the boundaries between places and times. Something that is not bound by the laws that govern the rest of our world. And the most horrifying truth of all? I do not think it is trying to hurt me. I think it is trying to keep me. Some nights, I drive north on the park's highway without intending to. I will realize that I have been driving for an hour, 2 hours, heading toward Fairbanks and the motel at mile marker 47, with no memory of deciding to go there. My hands on the wheel, my foot on the gas, but someone else, something else, piloting my car toward a destination I am desperate to avoid. One of these nights, I will not turn around. One of these nights, I will pull into that empty parking lot and walk back to room 24, where the scratches on the door will be fresh and deep and long enough to paint a picture of pure desperation. And when I open that door and step inside, I suspect I will find something waiting for me that has been waiting for a very long time. I will find I am no longer alone. And most horrifying of all, I am not entirely sure that I will mind. Story 6. Key didn't. He matched the door. I should have noticed that the key was warm when he handed it to me. Not room temperature warm, body temperature warm, like someone had been holding it tight in their palm just seconds before I walked through that door. The front desk handed over a key without conversation. No greeting, no eye contact, just a rust-spotted key with a plastic tag marked 14, sliding across the counter like he wanted his hand away from it as fast as possible. The clerk was maybe 60, with that weathered Alaska face that comes from too many winters and not enough sunlight. His fingers trembled when they touched the key. I remember that now. I remember thinking it was just the cold. In this part of Alaska, motels rarely have spare rooms. The oil workers fill them up. The hunters, the people running from something down south. But the Frontier Lodge sat half empty that October night, most of its windows dark as dead eyes. Only my headlights had been on that gravel lot. Only my truck making fresh tracks in the early snow. The scary part started when I got to room 14. The key opened a door that didn't feel assigned. The lock turned too easily, like it had been opened 100 times that day. Like it was expecting me. The room smelled wrong immediately. Not the usual motel mustiness or cheap cleaning products. Something else. Something organic and cold, like earth that had been disturbed after a long time of being still. I dropped my bag on the bed, and that is when I saw it. The bed was made, perfectly made, military corners. Not a wrinkle, but there was an impression on top of the comforter. A full-body impression, like someone had been lying there recently. The shape was too defined to be old. I could see where the head had been, where the legs bent at the knee. My heart started doing that thing where it beats in your throat, where you can feel your pulse in your temples. I told myself it was nothing. Housekeeping had tested the bed or something. But housekeeping would have smoothed it out. Housekeeping would have noticed. I walked to the bathroom, needing to splash water on my face, needing to reset my thinking. The light flickered twice before staying on, fluorescent and harsh. The mirror was fogged at the edges, even though the room was cold. Really cold. I could see my breath. In the mirror, I could see the reflection of the main room behind me. The impression on the bed was deeper now. I spun around. The bed looked the same as when I had walked away from it. Same perfect corners, same body-shaped depression in the middle. But it was deeper, more defined, like the weight pressing into it had increased. That disturbing feeling in my gut turned into something else. Something closer to fear. Real fear, the kind that makes your hands shake and your mouth go dry. I grabbed my bag, ready to leave, ready to sleep in my truck if I had to. But when I reached for the door handle, it was locked. From the outside, I had not locked it. I had not even closed it all the way. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was on, both engaged from the inside, which should have been impossible because I was standing right there and I had not touched them. My mind tried to find a rational explanation. Old building, settled wrong, locks that engage on their own. But locks do not work that way. Chains do not lift themselves into place. I unlocked everything with shaking hands and pulled the door open. The cold Alaska air hit me like a wall. It should have felt like relief. It should have felt like escape. But when I stepped outside, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Every room had a light on now. Every single window glowed yellow in the darkness. Rooms that had been black and empty 15 minutes ago were lit up like someone had flipped a master switch. But there were no cars in the lot except mine. No footprints in the snow except my own trail from the truck to room 14. The creepy silence pressed against my ears. No highway noise, no wind, nothing. Just that unsettling quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something. I looked back into room 14. The impression on the bed was gone. The comforter was smooth, perfectly smooth, like it had never been disturbed at all. My brain could not process it, could not make it make sense. I stepped back into the room, and I do not know why I did that. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get in my truck and drive until I hit Anchorage or Fairbanks or anywhere with people and lights and explanations. But something pulled me back inside. Some horrible curiosity, some need to understand. The door closed behind me. Not slammed, just closed, soft and final, like a mouth closing. That is when I saw the photographs. They were on the dresser, lined up in a neat row. 5 frames, cheap wooden frames, the kind you buy at a drugstore. I had looked at that dresser when I first came in. It had been empty, just scarred wood and a lamp with a broken shade. But now there were photographs. And they were all of me. Me pumping gas 3 hours ago at the station outside Palmer. Me eating a sandwich at that rest stop near Willow. Me checking my phone at a red light in Wasilla. Me. In every photo, going back through my entire drive north, the horror of it hit me like a physical thing. Someone had been following me, photographing me, for hours, and somehow those photos had gotten into this room before I did. Somehow they were waiting for me. My hands went numb. That nightmare feeling of being trapped, of being watched, of being chosen for something, wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I grabbed the frames, ready to smash them, ready to destroy the evidence of whatever terrifying game this was. But when I picked up the first one, the photo changed. It was not me at the gas station anymore. It was me standing in this room, right now, holding a photograph. The image showed me from behind, from the corner of the room near the ceiling, like someone was crouched up there in the shadows watching me. I dropped the frame, the glass shattered, and in the broken reflection on the floor, I saw something move behind me. Not in the room, in the reflection, a shadow that was not mine, tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that bent wrong. It stood directly behind me in the mirror world, close enough that I should have felt its breath on my neck. I did not turn around. Some animal part of my brain knew that turning around was the wrong choice. That seeing it directly was worse than seeing it in the reflection. I kept my eyes on the broken glass, watching that dark figure watching me. And I walked backward toward the door. Slowly, carefully, the shadow moved when I moved, matched my steps, its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn. The eerie wrongness of it, the unnatural way it existed only in reflections, made my skin crawl. I could feel it even though I could not see it. Feel its attention on me like a weight. My back hit the door. I reached behind me for the handle. Found it, turned it, locked again. Panic hit me then. Real, choking panic. I spun around, breaking my own rule, needing to see the room with my own eyes. It was empty. No shadow, no figure, just a cheap motel room with broken glass on the floor and photographs of me scattered across the dresser. But the feeling of being watched had not gone away. It had gotten stronger. The bathroom light went out. Then the lamp, then the overhead. One by one, the lights died, and the darkness swallowed the room in sections. Chilling, complete darkness. The kind where you cannot see your hand in front of your face. The kind that feels alive. I fumbled for my phone, fingers clumsy with fear. The screen lit up, bright and shocking. No signal. Of course no signal. But the light was something. The light was everything. I swept it around the room, and that is when I saw the writing. On the walls, on the ceiling, hundreds of words carved into the paint and plaster. Names, dates, messages scratched with fingernails or keys or something sharp and desperate. The writing covered every surface, overlapping and crowded. Years' worth of messages from people who had been in this room before me. Help us. It does not let us leave. Room 14 is hungry. I have been here for 3 days, but my watch says 3 minutes. My name is Robert Chan, and if you find this, I died in October. The messages went on and on. Some fresh, some faded, some scratched so deep into the wall that plaster dust still clung to the letters. And at the center of it all, directly above the bed, one phrase repeated over and over in different hands, different styles, different levels of panic. The key does not match the door. The key does not match the door. The key does not match the door. I looked at the key still in my hand. The warm key, the key that had opened the lock too easily. And I understood with horrible, dawning certainty that the clerk had not given me the key to room 14. He had given me a key. One of many. One of hundreds, maybe. Keys that open this door but should not. Keys that bring people here. Keys that are always warm because they are always being held by the next person in line. Something moved in the corner. Not the shadow from the reflection. Something else. Something that had always been there, waiting in the dark parts of the room where the phone light could not reach. I heard it breathe. A wet, rattling sound, like lungs that had not worked properly in a long time. The disturbing truth settled over me. This was not a haunting. This was not a ghost or a spirit or something trying to scare me away. This was something that fed. Something that lured people here with warm keys and empty parking lots and clerks who would not make eye contact. Something that had been doing this for years. For decades, maybe. And I had walked right into it. The breathing got closer. I could smell it now. That organic, earthy smell from before, but stronger. Rotting, ancient. The smell of something that should be underground. My phone light flickered. The battery was full, but the light flickered anyway, like the darkness was fighting it. Winning against it, I threw myself at the door, slamming my shoulder into it, not caring about the pain. The wood did not budge. I hit it again. The terror gave me strength, but the door was solid. Impossibly solid, like it was part of the wall now, like it had never been meant to open from the inside. Behind me, the breathing stopped. The silence was worse. So much worse, because silence meant it was moving. Silence meant it was close. I pressed my back against the door and raised my phone. The light caught it for just a second, just long enough to see. Tall, thin, skin like old paper, eyes that were not eyes but holes, mouth open in a permanent scream of hunger. And behind it, in the shadows, others. Dozens of others. All the people who had checked into room 14 with warm keys and terrible trust. They were not dead. That was the worst part. They were not dead. They were still here, still aware, trapped in the spaces between the walls, feeding the thing that had caught them, becoming part of the room itself. I could see their faces in the wallpaper, their hands pressed against the inside of the plaster. Moving, reaching. The thing lunged. My phone went black. And in that complete, suffocating darkness, I felt cold fingers wrap around my wrist. Felt myself being pulled backward, not toward the shadow creature, toward the wall, toward the space where the others waited. I screamed, fought, kicked, but the grip was iron, inevitable. The wall behind me felt soft now, yielding, like flesh, like a throat opening. I was sinking into it. The room was swallowing me, making me part of itself, part of the collection. My last thought before the plaster closed over my face was about my truck in the parking lot, about how it would sit there until the snow covered it, about how someone else would eventually come, another person driving through Alaska, another person tired and cold and looking for a room, another person who would walk up to that desk and see a clerk who would not make eye contact. And the clerk would reach under the counter, and he would pull out a key, and the key would be warm, because I would be holding it, waiting, hoping someone would take it, hoping someone would open that door. Because in room 14, misery does not just love company. It requires it, it feeds on it, and the hunger never stops. The walls sealed shut, the room reset itself, the bed smoothed out, the photographs disappeared, the lights came back on. Everything perfect and waiting, and somewhere far away, on a dark highway cutting through the Alaskan wilderness, headlights were coming closer. Someone else was driving north. Someone else was tired. Someone else was looking for a place to stop. The key under the counter was already getting warm. Story 7. No one answered the front desk. The Alaskan motel bell rang loudly in the empty lobby. In Alaska, someone always answers. Eventually. This time, nothing did. I stood there in the darkness, my hand still trembling on that tarnished brass bell, and I knew something was horrifying about the silence that followed. The kind of silence that feels alive, watching, waiting for you to make the next move. Outside, the November wind screamed across the frozen wasteland, but inside, the air hung thick and still, like the motel itself was holding its breath. My truck had died 40 miles back on the Dalton Highway, that lonely stretch of road they call the Hall Road, where cell service is a fantasy and other drivers who ghosts you might see once every few hours if luck smiles on you. The temperature was dropping fast, hitting 20 below, and frostbite does not care about your plans or your pride. When I saw the flickering neon sign cutting through the blizzard, North Star Motel, vacancy, I nearly cried with relief. Now I was not so sure relief was the right word. The lobby stretched before me in shadows, illuminated only by a single desk lamp that cast everything in sickly yellow light. Fake wood paneling covered the walls, water stained and warped. A mounted moose head hung crooked above the unattended desk, its glass eyes reflecting that dim light in a way that seemed almost accusatory. The carpet beneath my boots was worn down to the threads in places, forming a path from the door to the desk that thousands of desperate travelers had walked before me. But where was everyone now? I rang the bell again. The sound echoed through what I assumed were empty hallways beyond the desk, disappearing into the unsettling quiet. My breath formed clouds in the cold air. The heating system was either broken or turned off, which made no sense. You do not turn off heat in Alaska in November unless you have a death wish or something to hide. Behind the desk, a small television flickered with no sound, showing nothing but static. A coffee maker sat on a side table, its glass pot half full of something dark that had long since gone cold. A cigarette burned in an ashtray, reduced to a perfect cylinder of ash that had not been disturbed, as if whoever lit it had simply vanished mid-smoke. That image unsettled me more than anything else. Someone had been here minutes ago, maybe seconds. The cigarette proved it, but the silence suggested I was utterly alone. I called out. My voice sounded small and foreign in that creepy space. Nothing answered. The wind outside intensified, rattling the windows in their frames. Snow pressed against the glass like pale hands seeking entry. I had two choices: go back into that nightmare blizzard and freeze to death before dawn, or stay here in this eerie, abandoned place and hope someone eventually showed up. Fear makes you rationalize. I told myself the clerk had stepped away to use the bathroom, or had gone to check on something in the back. People do not just disappear. There had to be a logical explanation for the cigarette, for the silence, for the growing sense of danger that crawled up my spine like frozen fingers. I decided to wait. The wooden chair behind the desk creaked when I sat down, and I immediately felt like I was violating some unspoken rule. The desk was cluttered with papers, receipts, a ledger book that lay open to a page filled with handwritten names and dates. I glanced at it without meaning to pry, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Every entry for the past week had been crossed out. Not just crossed out, scratched through with such violence that the pen had torn through the paper in places. Thick black lines obliterated names, room numbers, dates. Someone had attacked this ledger with fury, with desperation, as if trying to erase something that should not exist. Except for one entry, at the bottom of the page, written in shaky handwriting that looked nothing like the neat script above it. Room 7. November 19th. Do not go inside. Today was November 19th. The fear that had been building in my chest suddenly crystallized into pure terror. Something was wrong here. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to brave the freezing darkness outside rather than stay another second in this haunted place. But the wind chose that moment to slam against the building with such force that the entire structure shuddered. The lights flickered. Through the window, I could see nothing but swirling white chaos. The blizzard had intensified into something supernatural. Something that would kill me in minutes if I tried to walk through it. I was trapped. The hallway beyond the desk yawned before me like an open mouth. Dark doorways lined both sides, stretching back into shadows the desk lamp could not reach. Somewhere in that darkness was room 7, and whatever disturbing thing waited inside it. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and grabbed a flashlight from my coat pocket. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling wallpaper and more of that worn carpet, forming a trail that led deeper into the motel. Above each door, tarnished brass numbers. 1, 2, 3, continuing down the hall. The heating system suddenly kicked on with a sound like a dying breath, and warm air began circulating through vents I had not noticed before. But the warmth brought something else with it. A smell. Faint at first, then growing stronger. Copper and rot, mixed with something chemical. Something that reminded me of hospitals and morgues and places where terrible things happen to human bodies. I should have run. Looking back, knowing what I know now, I should have taken my chances with the blizzard. Freezing to death is peaceful, they say. What waited for me in that motel was anything but peaceful. But curiosity is a horrifying thing. It drives us to open doors that should stay closed, to seek answers to questions we should never ask. I found myself walking down that hallway, the flashlight beam jumping from door to door, counting upward. 4, 5, 6. Room 7 sat at the end of the hall. The door was different from the others. While they were simple wood-painted institutional beige, this one was metal, reinforced, with a deadbolt that locked from the outside. Like a cell, like something designed to keep whatever was inside from getting out. 3 deep scratches ran down the door, the surface, gouges that had torn through the paint and into the metal beneath. They looked fresh. They looked like claw marks, though I could not imagine what could have made them. The marks were too wide, too deep, the spacing all wrong for any animal I knew. My hand reached for the doorknob before my brain could stop it. The metal was ice cold, so cold it burned my palm. I pulled back, gasping, and that is when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, rhythmic breathing coming from inside room 7. Not human breathing. The cadence was wrong, the depth too great. Whatever made that sound had lungs the size of oil drums, pulling air in and pushing it out with mechanical precision. And then it spoke, not in words, not in any language, but I heard it inside my mind, a voice that bypassed my ears entirely and planted itself directly into my consciousness. It knew my name. It knew where I came from, where I was going, the make and model of my dead truck 40 miles north. It knew about the argument I had with my brother 3 weeks ago, the one that made me volunteer for this supply run in the first place. It knew everything, and it wanted me to understand that nowhere was safe, that distance meant nothing, that it had been waiting for me specifically. I ran. The hallway stretched impossibly long as I fled, my boots pounding on that worn carpet, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The breathing followed me, growing louder, coming from every room now, from the walls themselves. The motel was alive with it, pulsing with that terrible rhythm. I burst into the lobby just as the front door exploded inward. Not from the wind, from something pushing through from outside, something massive and shadow dark that flowed more than walked. The cold that came with it was absolute, the kind of cold that exists in the spaces between stars, in the depths of frozen oceans, in places where warmth and life have never existed. The creature had no face I could focus on, no form that made sense to my eyes. Looking at it was like staring at a nightmare that refused to solidify, that shifted and changed with each heartbeat. But I felt its attention on me, hungry and ancient and utterly inhuman. I dove behind the desk as it entered fully, my mind fragmenting with terror. This was not a bear, not a wolf, not anything that belonged to the natural world. This was something else, something that had found a crack between realities and slipped through into ours, drawn by the cold and the isolation and the desperate fear of travelers who found themselves stranded in the Alaskan darkness. The ledger lay open before me, those scratched-out names suddenly making horrifying sense. Every person who had checked into this motel in the past week, every person who had encountered whatever lived in room 7, all of them erased, removed, consumed. And I was next. The creature moved closer. I could hear its breathing, feel the unnatural cold radiating from its body. Frost spread across the desk, across the floor, across my hands as I fumbled in my pocket for anything that might help. My fingers closed around my lighter, the cheap plastic one I used for emergency fire starting. Fire, heat, the opposite of what this thing was. I flicked the lighter, and the small flame might as well have been the sun. The creature recoiled with a sound like breaking ice, pulling back toward the doorway. The flame was tiny, pathetic, but it held something this thing could not tolerate. Warmth, life, defiance against the endless cold. I grabbed papers from the desk and lit them, then the ledger, then anything flammable I could reach. The fire spread quickly across the dry wood and ancient carpet. Smoke filled the lobby, and through it, I saw the creature retreating, flowing back out into the blizzard where it belonged. The motel burned around me as I stumbled out the back exit into the nightmare cold. The fire, this warmth followed me for a few precious seconds before the wind tore it away. I ran through snow that came up to my knees, my lungs screaming, my body shutting down from hypothermia. I do not remember much after that. Highway patrol found me 3 miles south, nearly dead, babbling about shadows and breathing in room 7. They said the motel had been abandoned for 15 years, that it burned down in a mysterious fire on November 19th, a decade and a half ago. They said I was delirious from the cold, hallucinating, that my truck had not died 40 miles north but right outside the ruins of the North Star Motel. But I remember the bell that no one answered. I remember the cigarette burning to ash. I remember the voice in my head that knew everything about me. And sometimes, late at night when the temperature drops and the wind howls, I hear that breathing again. Slow and rhythmic and impossibly deep. Waiting, always waiting, because in Alaska, the cold is not just weather. It is alive, and it is always hungry. Story 8. Darkness watches back. What if you realized, too late, that something had been watching you the entire time? Not in some distant, abstract way, but close. Right there. The entire time. That is what happened to me in Alaska. And I need to tell someone before I lose my mind completely. My name is Michael Torres. I am 48 years old. I work in insurance claims adjustments. I have a wife and 2 kids in Seattle. This story is absolutely true. And if you are listening right now, you need to understand that every detail I am about to share actually occurred. I was driving the Denali Highway in October when my truck broke down. This was not some isolated mountain pass. This was one of the few roads connecting Fairbanks to the coastal region, the kind of road where you see maybe 3 other vehicles in an entire day. I had cell service, 1 bar, enough to see that the nearest town was Healy, a small settlement about 16 miles south. The nearest motel was the Midnight Sun Lodge, a name that felt darkly ironic in October when darkness lasts nearly 18 hours a day. The owner was a woman named Patricia. She was maybe 60, with blonde hair gone gray at the roots and the kind of tired eyes you see in people who have spent too many winters in places where the sun abandons you. She did not smile when I arrived. She gave me a key and a room number. Room 7. She told me the truck could be repaired tomorrow morning. The next mechanic was in town, 20 miles away, but he could come out at dawn. I did not think anything was wrong yet. Alaska felt wild and remote. Sure, but that was expected. The motel was standard issue. Worn carpet, thin walls, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbors breathing if they stand at the right spot on the wall. Room 7 faced the woods. The Alaskan Motel window looked out toward the tree line. In Alaska, darkness at night feels closer than elsewhere. There is no city glow. There is no distant freeway sound. There is just black. Complete, suffocating black that starts at the edge of the parking lot and swallows everything beyond 50 feet. That first night, I stood at the window and looked into that darkness. The glass felt thin. The cold radiated through the frame like the motel was barely holding back the world outside. Keeping the curtains open felt like a mistake, but I left them open anyway. I told myself I wanted to see the stars. October in Alaska gives you the Milky Way like nothing you see in the lower 48. The sky was stunning, streaked with that creamy white river of light. But I did not really care about stars. Something in me wanted to look at the darkness. Something wanted to keep watching the space between the parking lot light and the tree line. I fell asleep around midnight. I woke at 3:17 in the morning. I know the time exactly because I looked at my phone. The red numbers burned themselves into my memory. 3:17. And I remember thinking, in that fuzzy space between sleep and waking, that something had changed. The air in the room felt different. Not warmer or colder, just different, dense, like the space around me had thickened. I did not move at first. I lay there under the blanket, listening. The window. Someone was at the window. I could not see anyone, but I knew it the way you know something in a nightmare before you see it. There was a presence on the other side of that thin glass. Not moving, not scratching, just standing right there, watching into the room where I lay. My heart did not jump or race. The fear I felt was deeper than panic. It was the kind of creeping dread that suggests your entire understanding of safety has been a comfortable lie. I sat up slowly. I did not look at the window. I looked at the door, and then I looked at the window. There was nothing there. No face, no shape, no shadow pressed against the glass. Just the darkness beyond, dark and complete as it had been hours earlier. But I felt watched. I got up and closed the curtains. I locked the door again, even though I had locked it before. I checked the window lock. It was secure. I pulled a chair against the door. An old, terrifying habit from childhood. Then I got back into bed. I did not sleep again that night. Around 5 in the morning, a disturbing thought occurred to me. What if there had been someone at the window, but not outside? What if they had been inside the room, standing in the darkness beside the window, looking down at me? What if they had been standing there for hours before I woke? I turned on every light in the room. The place was empty. Of course it was empty. But the idea had planted itself. Paranoia is a terrifying thing because once it starts, it infects everything. Every shadow becomes suspicious. Every sound becomes a threat. The mechanic arrived at 7 in the morning and fixed my truck by 9. A simple problem. A loose alternator connection. Something that should have taken 15 minutes but took him longer because his hands were shaking and he kept dropping tools. When I asked him if he was all right, he did not answer. He just looked at me with an intensity that felt like a question he was afraid to ask. I should have left right then. Instead, I asked Patricia if I could stay another night. My wife was not expecting me until late the next day. The thought of driving that empty highway in the dark felt worse somehow than staying another night in the motel with the creepy window. She did not want me to stay. I could see it in her face. She wanted me out of that room. But she did not refuse. She just took my credit card again and told me the same room was available. That is when the real nightmare began. I spent the entire day in Healy, walking around the town, sitting in a small diner that served terrible coffee and a burger that tasted like cardboard. The waitress, a young woman with a haunted expression, asked me if I was staying at the Midnight Sun. When I said yes, she did not say anything more. She just kept refilling my coffee and did not meet my eyes. The fear was spreading. I could feel it, like something was seeping out from that motel and infecting the entire town. I returned at 6 in the evening, just as the darkness was beginning its descent. Twilight in October in Alaska is a brief thing. You get maybe 20 minutes of actual grayness before night swallows everything completely. I wanted to be inside before the darkness took over. This time, I requested a different room. Patricia looked at me carefully when I asked. She said every other room was occupied. This was obviously a lie. I had seen the parking lot. There were maybe 4 other cars. But something in her expression told me not to push it. Something told me that she would not let me leave room 7. That I was supposed to be in that room. I went back to 7 with a sense of stepping toward something inevitable. That night, I kept the curtains closed. I double-checked the locks. I left the television playing, even though the only channels that came in clear were true crime documentaries and some evangelical preacher talking about demons. I fell asleep watching the preacher. Irony not lost on me. I woke at exactly 3:17 again, the same time, and this time, I heard something. A scratching at the window. Not frantic, not aggressive, just a soft, methodical scratching. Like fingernails drawn slowly across the glass. I did not look. I covered my head with the blanket like a child. The scratching continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then it stopped. Silence. The silence was worse. I lay there, breathing in the stale air trapped under the blanket, and I understood that something was playing with me, testing me. Whatever was outside that window knew I was terrified, and it was enjoying that fear in a way that suggested intelligent malice. This was not some animal. No creature I knew of would scratch at a window in that rhythmic, deliberate way. When I pulled the blanket down, the scratching had stopped. There was no mark on the window. No visible evidence that anything had touched it at all. But the glass was cold. colder than it should be. I could feel the cold radiating from it from across the room, even through the closed curtains. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, I packed everything and went to find Patricia. I told her my truck was fixed and I was leaving immediately. I tried to sound casual, but my voice came out wrong. Strained. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she asked me a question that I will never forget. She asked me if I had seen it. I did not answer. I could not answer because I did not know what she meant. Had I seen what? The scratch marks? Something outside the window? And more importantly, how did she know that something had happened? She seemed to take my silence as an answer. She nodded slowly and said something that I am still trying to process. She said that the window in room 7 had not been changed since 1987. That before 1987, the owner kept getting complaints about the room. About people hearing sounds. About people feeling watched. She said a man had committed suicide in that room in 1986. He had hung himself from the shower rod. They found him 3 days later. After 1987, the motel put in new curtains and did not talk about it anymore. But the window stayed the same. She told me the window was the original window from when the motel was built in 1963. The glass was thick and old, the kind of glass that was made differently. She said she did not know why, but people reported more problems in the room after the suicide. As if something had changed in that space. Something had shifted. Then she said something that made my blood go cold. She said that the scratching usually started on the second night. That is when the listener counts. That is when whatever watches from outside that window decides if it wants to keep watching or if it wants to do something more. I did not believe her, or I did not want to believe her, but I noticed she had rented me the only room that faced the dark woods. On purpose. There had been 4 other cars in the parking lot, but somehow room 7 was the one available. I drove south from Healy without stopping. I did not look in my rearview mirror. I did not look at the road behind me. I drove with my hands gripping the wheel, feeling something terrifying in my chest that I can only describe as the knowledge that I had left something behind in that room. Not physically, but a part of me. A part that was still there, lying in that bed, feeling the presence on the other side of the window. I made it back to Seattle by the next morning. I did not tell my wife the real reason why I came back early. I just said the truck was fixed faster than expected. But things are different now. I notice that I do not like standing in front of windows at night. My wife thinks I have a new habit of closing all the curtains at dusk. She does not know it is because of that motel. She does not know that sometimes, late at night, I wake up and feel like something is standing outside our house, watching through the glass. 6 months have passed since that night in Alaska. 6 months, and I still do not like to think about what was happening in that room. What was trying to happen? What might have happened if I had stayed a third night? Because I have started to understand something horrifying. A few months ago, I did some research. I looked into the Midnight Sun Lodge. I found old newspaper articles about suicides in the area. 3 of them at that motel. 3 people in the last 40 years, all in different rooms. All found hanging, and dozens of reports of strange experiences, strange sounds, strange visitors in the night. But here's what terrifies me most. Every single person who reported an experience in that motel said that the disturbing events always started on their second night. Like some kind of countdown. Like the motel itself was not looking for brief encounters. Like it was testing its guests. Deciding which ones were right. Which ones would stay long enough. I have nightmares about what happens on the third night. I have nightmares about who is supposed to find me. And I wake up at 3:17 in the morning, more often than not, with the absolute certainty that I am being watched. Not from outside my window. From inside my room, from the darkness in the corner, from the space between the door and the wall. Something from that place followed me home. And I am still not sure if it is waiting for a third chance, or if it is patient enough to keep watching until the moment I finally feel safe enough to let my guard down completely. Because in the darkness, in the real darkness, things are patient. Things are hungry, and things have all the time in the world to wait for you to forget to close the curtains. The window faced only darkness that first night in Alaska. But now every window in my house faces only darkness. And I can never be certain which side of the glass I am really on anymore. That is the most terrifying thing of all. Story 9. Wake-up call that never came. I requested a wake-up call at the front desk for 4:30 in the morning. In Alaska, the winter mornings come quietly and quickly, and I could not afford to miss my connecting flight out of Anchorage. The phone never rang. But I woke anyway, not to an alarm, not to sunlight creeping through the curtains. I woke to the feeling of someone standing at the foot of my bed, watching me in the darkness. The Midnight Sun Motor Lodge was the kind of place you only stop at out of desperation. 43 miles outside Fairbanks, sitting alone on a stretch of highway that cuts through endless forest and frozen wasteland. I had been driving for 16 hours straight, my eyes burning from exhaustion, my hands cramping on the wheel. When I saw the flickering neon sign promising vacancy and hot coffee, I pulled in without thinking twice. That was my first mistake. The woman at the front desk had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and skin so pale it looked almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. She smiled when I asked for a wake-up call, her teeth too white, too perfect. She wrote down my room number and the time in a leather-bound logbook that looked older than the building itself. She promised me she would not forget. She told me to sleep well. She told me I was going to need it. I should have asked what she meant by that. I should have walked back to my truck and driven through the night, exhaustion and all. But the room was warm and the bed looked clean and my body was begging for rest. So I locked the door, set my own alarm as backup, and closed my eyes. The presence woke me at 3:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because my phone was still glowing on the nightstand, the alarm set but silent. The room was dark except for that pale blue light, and in that light, I could see the outline of someone standing perfectly still at the foot of my bed. Tall, impossibly tall, the head nearly touching the ceiling. The figure did not move, did not breathe. It just stood there, and the longer I stared, the more I realized that what I was looking at was not quite human. My breath caught in my throat. Every horror story I had ever heard, every creepy tale told around campfires, every nightmare that had ever jolted me awake came flooding back. This was different. This was real. The fear I felt was not the kind you get from a movie or a book. It was primal. It was the fear of prey realizing it has been cornered by something that should not exist. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body would not respond. I lay frozen, my heart hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The figure tilted its head slowly to one side, the movement jerky and unnatural, like a bird studying an insect it was about to devour. Then it took a step closer. The floorboards did not creak. There was no sound at all. It simply moved through space as if the laws of physics were suggestions it chose to ignore. I finally found my voice. I shouted for it to get out, to leave me alone, but the words came out as barely a whisper. The figure stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room grew colder. Not the cold of winter seeping through bad insulation. This was different. This was the cold of a grave. The cold of something dead and ancient and hungry. My hand shot out and slapped the lamp on the nightstand. Light flooded the room. The figure was gone, vanished, like it had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. I knew it was real. The terror still gripped my chest like a vice, my breathing rapid and shallow. I threw off the covers and stood on shaking legs, scanning every corner of the small room. Empty. Just me and the standard motel furniture and the unsettling feeling that I was still being watched. I checked the door, still locked from the inside. Chain still in place. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked the closet. Nothing but wire hangers and the smell of mothballs. There was nowhere for anyone to hide, nowhere for that thing to have gone. But it had been there. I was certain of it. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, waiting for dawn to break so I could get the hell out of this place. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. I kept my eyes on the door, on the window, on the shadows in the corners. Every small sound made me jump. The heater clicking on, the wind rattling the glass, the building settling. Everything felt threatening now. Everything felt wrong. At 4:30, the phone on the nightstand rang. The sound was so sudden and so loud that I actually yelped. My wake-up call, right on time. I picked up the receiver with a trembling hand and held it to my ear. No one spoke, just static, soft and constant. And underneath the static, something else. A sound I could not quite identify. It was rhythmic, steady, almost like breathing. I slammed the phone down and grabbed my bag. I did not bother to check out. I just wanted to leave. I threw open the door and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered and buzzed, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with identical doors, all closed. All silent. I turned left toward the lobby and started walking. That was when I noticed something disturbing. The room numbers were wrong. I had been in room 22. I remembered the brass numbers on the door. But as I walked past the rooms, the numbers descended. 21, 20, 19. I kept walking. 18, 17, 16. The lobby should have been just ahead, but the hallway kept going. 15, 14, 13. I stopped. This was impossible. The building was not this big. I had seen it from the outside when I checked in. Single story, maybe 20 rooms total, but the hallway continued, stretching into the distance farther than should have been possible. The lights flickered more violently now, and in the moments of darkness between flickers, I saw shapes moving. Quick, darting, gone before I could focus on them. Panic rising, I turned and ran back the way I had come. The numbers climbed, 16, 17, 18, but room 22 never appeared. Instead, the numbers kept going. 23, 24, 25. The hallway behind me had changed. I spun around. Both directions now looked identical. Endless. Impossible. A door opened somewhere ahead of me. I could not see which one. The sound echoed through the corridor, followed by footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming toward me. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath coming in short gasps, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, to do something. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then I saw her, the woman from the front desk, still wearing the same clothing, still with that too white smile, but something was different now. Her movements were stiff, mechanical. Her eyes did not blink. She walked toward me with that same steady pace, her arms hanging limp at her sides, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. I ran. I did not think about where I was going. I just ran. Behind me, the footsteps continued their relentless approach, never speeding up, never slowing down, always maintaining that same horrifying rhythm. I tried doors as I passed them, yanking on handles, pounding on wood. All locked, all sealed. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, and I realized with mounting horror that I was trapped. Then I saw it, an exit sign, glowing red at the end of the corridor. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The footsteps behind me continued their steady approach. I hit the exit door at full speed, slamming into the push bar with my shoulder. The door flew open and I tumbled out into the freezing Alaskan night. Snow, everywhere, deep and pristine and utterly empty. I scrambled to my feet and looked back at the building. The Midnight Sun Motor Lodge loomed behind me, its windows dark, its neon sign dead and dark. But that was wrong. When I had arrived, the sign had been lit. The lobby had been bright and welcoming. Now the entire place looked abandoned, decrepit, like it had been empty for years. My truck sat alone in the parking lot, covered in a thick layer of snow that should not have accumulated in just a few hours. I dug my keys from my pocket with numb fingers and ran toward it, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The building remained dark and silent. No sign of the woman. No sign of anything. Just an old, forgotten motel slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. I reached the truck and yanked open the door. The interior light did not come on. I climbed in and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then died. I tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. Completely drained. Impossible. The truck was nearly new. I had driven it just hours before without any problems. Movement in the rearview mirror made me freeze. The woman was standing at the edge of the parking lot, just visible in the darkness. Still, watching. And she was not alone. Other figures emerged from the tree line, tall and wrong and moving with that same jerking, unnatural gait I had seen in my room. They formed a loose circle around the truck, closing in slowly, methodically. I locked the doors and grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal. I was in the middle of nowhere, trapped in a dead vehicle, surrounded by things that should not exist. The figures drew closer. I could see them more clearly now in the faint moonlight reflecting off the snow. Their faces were blank, smooth, like mannequins. Their movements were synchronized, as if controlled by a single mind. Then I remembered the emergency kit in the back seat. Road flares. I twisted around and grabbed the plastic case, fumbling it open with shaking hands. The figures were at the windows now, pressing their featureless faces against the glass, their breath fogging the surface. I pulled out a flare, struck it against the cap, and brilliant red light filled the truck. The figures recoiled. Not much, just a slight backward movement. But it was something. I grabbed another flare and struck it, then kicked open the driver's side door and held both flares out in front of me like torches. The creatures backed away, maintaining their circle but keeping their distance from the light. I started walking, slowly, carefully, back to the highway. The figures followed, pacing me, staying just beyond the reach of the flares. The snow was deep and the going was difficult, but I did not stop. I could not stop. Behind me, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Singing. soft and melodic and completely at odds with the nightmare I was living. The woman from the front desk was singing a lullaby, her voice carrying through the still night air. The highway appeared ahead, a dark ribbon cutting through the white landscape. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the flares starting to sputter and fade. The figures sensed the change. They moved closer. The circle tightened. I broke into a run, high-stepping through the snow, my muscles burning with the effort. I hit the pavement of the highway and turned north, running along the shoulder, the flares now barely more than sparks. Headlights appeared in the distance. A truck, an actual vehicle with an actual human driver. I waved the dying flares frantically, and the truck slowed, pulling to a stop beside me. The driver was an older man with a thick beard and kind eyes. He took one look at me and told me to get in. I climbed into the warm cab and glanced back at the tree line. The figures were gone, vanished as completely as if they had never existed. The man asked me what I was doing out here in the middle of the night. I tried to explain, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. He listened anyway. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me something that made my skin crawl. The Midnight Sun Motor Lodge had burned down in 1981. 15 people died in the fire, including the owner and her entire staff. The land was cursed, he said. Local tribes had warned against building there, but nobody listened. After the fire, people reported seeing lights in the ruins, hearing voices, seeing figures walking through the ashes. The state eventually bulldozed what was left and tried to sell the land. But nobody would buy it. Too many stories, too many unexplained disappearances, hunters and hikers who ventured too close and were never seen again. The old man told me I was lucky. He told me most people who checked into that place never checked out. He drove me to Fairbanks and dropped me at a hotel near the airport. I thanked him and stumbled inside, still in shock, still trying to process what had happened. The clerk at this hotel was young and cheerful and completely normal. I checked in without incident and went up to my room. It was clean and bright and blessedly ordinary. I did not sleep. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall until sunrise, my mind replaying every terrifying moment. When morning finally came, I checked out and went straight to the airport. I did not tell anyone else what had happened. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. But 3 days after I returned home to Seattle, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a leather-bound logbook, old and worn and filled with names written in faded ink. Hundreds of names, thousands maybe, each one with a date and a room number and a time. Wake-up calls that were never delivered. Guests who checked in but never left. My name was on the last page. Room 22, 4:30 a.m. And written beneath it in that same precise handwriting were 5 words that I see every time I close my eyes. You are still checked in. The phone in my apartment rang last night at exactly 4:30 in the morning. I did not answer it. I will never answer it. But it rings every night now, at the same time, with the same message waiting on the other end. Static and breathing and that soft, melodic singing from a woman who burned to death 40 years ago in a motel that should not exist anymore. I requested a wake-up call before dawn. In Alaska, mornings come quietly and quickly. The phone never rang when it was supposed to. But it rings now, every night, forever. And I know that one night, I will be too weak or too curious or too exhausted to resist. I will pick up that phone. And when I do, I will hear the voice on the other end telling me my room is ready. That checkout time has passed. That I need to come back and finish what I started. The scariest part is not the calls. It is not the nightmares that jolt me awake in a cold sweat. It is the certainty growing in my mind that one day soon, I will find myself driving north again. Back to Alaska. Back to that stretch of highway. Back to the place where the Midnight Sun Motor Lodge still stands in some dark corner of reality, waiting patiently for its guests to return. Because some hotels never let you leave, and some wake-up calls are not meant to start your day. They are meant to end everything else. Story 10. Motel was gone in the morning. I still remember the exact moment I realized something was deeply, horrifyingly wrong. It was not when I saw the figure standing motionless in the parking lot at 3 in the morning. It was not when I discovered the photograph slipped under my door. It was when I drove back along that empty Alaskan highway the next day and found nothing where the motel had been. Just wilderness, just silence, just the creeping, terrifying certainty that I had spent the night somewhere that should not exist. Let me start from the beginning, because every disturbing detail matters. I work as a commercial insurance adjuster, which means I drive. A lot. My territory covers the Pacific Northwest up through British Columbia and into Alaska. Lonely highways, forgotten towns, endless stretches of nothing but trees and mountains and the kind of darkness that swallows headlights whole. I had been doing this job for 12 years. I thought I knew every truck stop, every roadside diner, every cheap motel between Seattle and Anchorage. I was wrong. It was late October when I started the drive back from Fairbanks. I had wrapped up a claim investigation earlier than expected, which put me on the road around 6 in the evening. In Alaska, that means total darkness. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon, my headlights carving out only a small tunnel of visibility in the overwhelming night. No other cars, no lights from distant houses, just me, the engine hum, and the eerie shadows of spruce trees pressing in from both sides. I planned to make it to the junction near Talk before stopping, but fatigue hit me hard around midnight. My eyes were burning, my reaction time was slowing. The white lines on the road started blurring together in a hypnotic, dangerous way. I needed sleep. That is when I saw the sign. It appeared suddenly in my headlights. A weathered wooden board with hand-painted letters. Northern Pines Motor Lodge. Next right, vacancy. The paint was faded, the wood gray with age, but it was clearly visible. Relief flooded through me. I had driven this highway dozens of times and never noticed this place, but distances can be deceptive at night in Alaska. Everything looks different in the dark. I took the exit, a narrow gravel road that curved away from the highway and plunged deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to crowd closer here, their branches forming a canopy that blocked even the faint starlight. My headlights caught glimpses of rusted chain link fence, abandoned equipment slowly being consumed by moss and undergrowth. The road wound for what felt like miles, much farther than any normal motel access road should extend. Then I saw the lights. The Northern Pines Motor Lodge sat in a small clearing, a single-story structure built in that classic 1960s roadside motel style. 12 rooms in a row, each door painted a faded turquoise, each window covered with thin curtains that glowed dully from interior lights. A neon sign buzzed and flickered above the office. Vacancy, vacancy, vacancy. The red glow cast everything in a disturbing, unnatural hue. But there were no other cars. The parking lot was empty except for the spaces directly in front of the office, where an old pickup truck sat covered in a thick layer of dust. The sight should have warned me. Any reasonable person would have turned around, driven back to the highway, pushed through the fatigue to reach a normal, populated town. But I was exhausted, my judgment was impaired, and something about the place felt almost welcoming in its isolation, like finding shelter in a storm. I parked and walked to the office. The door creaked open before I could touch it. A man stood behind the counter, elderly, with deeply lined skin and eyes that seemed too reflective in the fluorescent light. He wore a flannel shirt and an expression that never quite reached a smile. He did not speak. He simply turned the registration book toward me and placed a pen on the counter. The book was ancient, its pages yellowed and filled with entries in different handwritings, different inks, spanning what looked like decades. I signed my name, wrote my license plate number, and slid the book back across the counter. The man took a key from the board behind him. Number 7. He placed it on the counter with a soft click that seemed too loud in the silent office. Then he pointed toward the row of rooms, his fingers steady and deliberate. I took the key. The metal was cold, almost painfully so, despite the warmth of the office. I muttered a thank you that went unacknowledged and stepped back into the night. Room 7 was in the middle of the row. As I walked along the covered walkway, I noticed things that fed a growing unease in my gut. The doors to the other rooms were closed, but I could see light seeping from beneath them. Yet there were no sounds, no television noise, no voices, no footsteps, just a creepy, oppressive silence that made my footsteps on the concrete seem deafening. I unlocked the door to room 7. The interior was exactly what you would expect from a budget motel frozen in time. A double bed with a thin floral bedspread, a small television bolted to a dresser, a bathroom visible through an open door, a painting of a mountain landscape on the wall, the colors faded to near monochrome. The air smelled of old carpet and something else, something faintly metallic that I could not quite identify. I dropped my bag on the bed and immediately noticed the photographs. They were scattered across the small desk near the window, maybe a dozen of them, black and white images that looked like they had been developed decades ago. I picked one up. It showed the motel from the same angle I had seen when I arrived, but the photo was old, the parking lot dirt instead of gravel, the neon sign dark. In front of room 7 stood a family, a man, a woman, 2 children. They were not smiling. I looked at another photograph. The same motel, different people, a couple standing by the office door, their faces blurred as if they had moved during the long exposure. Another photo showed a single figure, impossible to identify, standing in the exact spot where my car was now parked. Every photograph featured the motel. Every photograph included people, and every single person in every image looked directly at the camera with expressions that ranged from blank to deeply, unnervingly disturbed. I should have left immediately. But exhaustion is a powerful thing, and fear can be rationalized when your mind is desperate for rest. I told myself these were probably just old marketing photos, some weird vintage decoration the owners thought added character. I stacked them in a neat pile and turned my attention to getting ready for bed. The television did not work. When I pressed the power button, the screen remained black, but a low static hiss emerged from the speakers. I unplugged it. The hissing continued. I checked the bathroom. Everything seemed normal until I noticed the mirror. The glass was old, spotted with age, but my reflection looked wrong somehow. The proportions were slightly off, my features just distorted enough to trigger that uncanny valley horror. I convinced myself it was the lighting, the angle, the ancient mirror. I splashed water on my face and returned to the bedroom. That is when I saw the figure in the parking lot. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see across the lot to the tree line beyond. Standing there, perfectly still, was a silhouette, human-shaped, tall, facing the motel, facing my room. I watched for a full minute, waiting for movement, for any sign this was just another guest stepping out for fresh air. The figure did not move, did not sway, did not even seem to breathe. I closed the curtains and turned off the light. Sleep came in fitful waves. I drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by sounds that might have been dreams. Footsteps on the concrete walkway, stopping at each door. A soft scratching noise against my window. The distant sound of a door opening and closing, in a slow, rhythmic pattern that felt deliberately timed to keep me on the edge of waking. At 3:17 in the morning, I heard the photographs sliding under my door. The sound was unmistakable. The soft scrape of paper on carpet, one after another, each image pushed through the narrow gap between door and floor. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the door, watching the shapes appear in the faint light seeping around the curtain edges. 6 photographs. 7, 8. I forced myself to get up. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The covered walkway was empty. The other room doors were all closed. Nothing moved, but I could feel something watching. A presence just outside my field of vision. Something patient and malevolent and terrifyingly focused. I did not open the door. Instead, I gathered the photographs from the floor. These were different from the ones on the desk. These were recent. The first showed my car in the parking lot, taken from the tree line, the angle exactly where I had seen the standing figure. The second showed me walking from the office to room 7, captured in profile, unaware I was being photographed. The third showed me through my room window, visible despite the curtains, standing at the desk examining the original photographs. The fourth photograph showed me sleeping. The angle suggested someone had been inside my room. Standing at the foot of the bed, camera pointed down at my unconscious body. The timestamp in the corner read 20 minutes ago. I checked the door, still locked from the inside. I checked the bathroom window, sealed shut, painted over years ago. There was no way someone could have entered. Yet the photograph was undeniable evidence that they had. The remaining images showed things I could not explain. The motel from different angles, but in each successive photo, the building looked more decrepit, more abandoned. Windows broken, walls collapsing, the neon sign shattered. And in every photo, figures stood in the parking lot, more and more of them, all facing the camera, all with those blank, disturbing expressions. The final photograph showed only text, handwritten on a white card. "You are permanent." I started packing immediately. Fear had burned through my exhaustion, replacing it with a sharp, horrifying clarity. I threw my belongings into my bag, grabbed my keys, and moved toward the door. Before I opened it, I looked through the peephole one more time. Every door along the motel row was now open. Every room was empty, dark inside, no lights despite what I had seen earlier. And standing in the parking lot, arranged in a perfect semicircle facing my door, were the figures from the photographs. 12 of them, motionless, watching. I backed away from the door. My hands were shaking, my heart hammered against my ribs. I needed another exit, but there was none. The window did not open. The bathroom had no external access. The only way out was through that door, past those things waiting in the night. Then the lights went out, not just in my room. I could see through the curtain gap that the entire motel had gone dark. The neon sign extinguished, the parking lot lights dead. Total, complete darkness. In that darkness, I heard them moving. Footsteps on concrete, slow and deliberate. Dozens of feet moving in perfect synchronization. They were approaching. The sound grew closer, closer, until I knew they were just outside my door. I pressed myself against the far wall, barely breathing, waiting for the door to burst open, for those figures to pour inside. But they stopped. The footsteps ceased. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the sound of approach. I stood in that darkness for what felt like hours, every sense straining, waiting for something to happen. Then, as suddenly as they had failed, the lights came back on. I rushed to the peephole. The parking lot was empty. The doors to the other rooms were closed again. Light seeped from beneath them as before. My car sat undisturbed. It was as if the past few minutes had never happened. I did not hesitate. I unlocked the door, threw it open, and ran to my car. The cold night air bit into my skin. My breath came in visible clouds. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the right key into the lock. Behind me, I felt the weight of observation. That same patient, malevolent attention. I got in the car, started the engine. The headlights flared to life, illuminating the motel. In that brief moment of illumination, I saw them again, standing in the windows of every room, pressed against the glass, watching me leave. I drove. The gravel road seemed longer on the way out, winding endlessly through the forest. Branches scraped against my car. Shadows moved between the trees, keeping pace with my speed. I pressed the accelerator harder, desperate to reach the highway, to escape this nightmare place. When I finally emerged onto the main road, dawn was breaking. The first gray light of morning revealed the familiar landscape, empty highways stretching north and south. I turned south, toward civilization, toward safety. I drove for 6 hours straight, only stopping when I reached a proper town with a gas station and people and the blessed normalcy of daylight commerce. I filled the tank with trembling hands and bought terrible coffee that tasted like salvation. That night, in a well-lit chain hotel surrounded by other guests, I tried to process what had happened. I told myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, some kind of breakdown brought on by stress and isolation. The photographs were still in my bag, but I could not bring myself to look at them. I left them there, buried under my clothes. 3 days later, I had to drive back along the same highway. A new claim in Fairbanks required my attention. I left early, planning to make the drive in daylight, planning to never stop until I reached my destination. But I needed to see. I needed to confirm that the Northern Pines Motor Lodge was real, that I had not imagined the entire horrifying experience. So as I drove north, I watched for the turnoff. I remembered approximately where it had been, a few hours south of Talk, marked by that weathered wooden sign. I never found it. I drove slowly, carefully, watching both sides of the highway. I passed landmarks I recognized from that night. I checked my odometer, my GPS, every possible reference point. But there was no gravel road, no wooden sign, no indication that any motel had ever existed in that location. I pulled over at the spot where I believed the turnoff should have been. Got out of my car, walked into the tree line. There was nothing, just wilderness, just the endless Alaskan forest, thick with spruce and underbrush. No sign of any structure, no gravel road, no indication that humans had ever disturbed this land. I pushed deeper, searching for any evidence. A foundation, debris, anything. I found one thing. Hidden under a layer of moss and fallen needles was a piece of weathered wood. I brushed away the organic debris and saw the faded paint. Part of a sign. The letters were barely visible, but I could make them out. Northern Pines. I dropped the wood and ran back to my car. That night in Fairbanks, I finally looked at the photographs. The old ones from the desk were unsettling but explainable. Vintage marketing materials, odd decoration, nothing supernatural. But the new ones, the ones slipped under my door, were different. In every photograph, in the background, barely visible, was the date. Not a timestamp from a digital camera. A physical date, printed on signs, visible in newspaper boxes, displayed on old calendars through windows. Every photograph showed a different decade, the 1970s, the 1960s, the 1940s, spanning nearly 80 years. And in the photograph of me sleeping, in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a figure standing in the shadows of my room. Not the angle of the photographer. A second presence. Watching both of us. I burned the photographs. All of them. I watched them curl and blacken in the hotel room sink, the faces of all those people from all those decades disappearing into ash and smoke. But I kept one. The last one. The white card with the handwritten message. You are permanent. 6 months have passed. I still drive the highways for work. I still cross that section of Alaskan road. Every time, I look for the turnoff. Every time, I find nothing. But last week, I received something in the mail. No return address, no postmark, just an envelope containing a single photograph. It shows the Northern Pines Motor Lodge, the parking lot, the row of rooms with their turquoise doors. And standing in front of room 7, looking directly at the camera with a blank expression, is me. I am wearing the same clothes I wore that night. I am holding the same key. But the photograph is dated 3 days from now. I do not know what it means. I do not know if I should be terrified or if this is some kind of sick prank. But I know one thing with absolute, chilling certainty. Somewhere out there, in the endless darkness between towns, in the forgotten spaces where highways cut through wilderness, the Northern Pines Motor Lodge still exists. Still waits, still collects its permanent guests. And it knows I am coming back. You made it to the end. Most people do not. These Alaskan motel stories are part of a continuing series about isolation, silence, and real psychological horror. Subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories, because once you stop listening, these places keep waiting.